Good morning. Hope you're all doing well. It's good to see you this morning. If you notice, we have some new posters here on the side, and Erica has reorganized the side ones, and so they remember when our walls were bare here. We finally have enough ones to change, in and out there. And so I'm going to introduce you to the new theme for this year. Obviously, you can see what they are. Usually, I had the same verse or thing on each side here, but obviously we have half of them on one side and half on the other side of the Ten Commandments. I was just thinking about this as I was sitting down. Hopefully everybody knows their Greek numbers. So we see that for the younger guys, obviously you can count to 10 hopefully in Greek. If not, hopefully you'll learn pretty quickly what these are. And so I'd like to talk about house rules. How many of you guys had house rules growing up? I'm curious. How many of them were spoken to you, what they were? Maybe they were explained to you while you were getting a spanking, because usually, every house has house rules, okay? But not all of them are clearly spoken. But they are all understood, right? They're all understood. Maybe when you're younger, you even remember thinking, oh, I guess that's a house rule. I found what that is because I got in trouble for it, right? So not all house rules are clearly spoken. It's nice if they are. And I don't know if yours, I'm curious, how many of you guys have house rules like written out, like put on the wall? Anybody? I've been to houses, we don't have that. We have some kind of written out, but not like all of them. I think we would have 43. No, but it's just interesting for homes that have house rules and how you do that. So that picture that I have there is kind of like going over it, and you can tell the look on her face. She's like, I don't know about these rules, as they're going through it there. And so remember Tony, I talked about last week a little bit, how he was claimed. He was abandoned by one of his parents. And then the other one was going to claim him, but before that, he was put into a foster home. Okay, and they haven't given it really any follow-up information, so he may still be in a foster home while they kind of decide what's going on. And so he's a happy guy, but his life has changed quite a bit because he went from one home that I'm sure had house rules and then was left, and then went to another home, and I imagine they have their own house rules. So what happens when a family adopts a child? Have you thought about that? Now, some of you have adopted a child, and maybe some of you have been adopted child yourself, and so that's just part of life. And when there is an adoption, there is an end to the former way of life and a beginning of a new one, right? Unless you were a baby, you don't really remember the life before. But when you get to maybe at least 3, you're going to have some memory of the former house rules, because there is a changing house rules if you get adopted, right? I imagine those house rules are introduced and there's a change there. I can only imagine being adopted when you're 25 years old. Say 25 years old and you're adopted. Maybe you may laugh at that and think that'd be strange, but yeah, can you imagine that process? Getting adopted when you're 25 and you're bringing all the student loan with you. Mom, Dad, and then you live with them. And how that conversation goes. And you get ready to go out. It's all right, I'm going to go out. I may see you tomorrow. And you're like, wait, son, come here. I know you got your own car, but we have some house rules. When do you outgrow house rules? When do you outgrow house rules? I don't know if you ever outgrow house rules, because the thing is, you think, when I get out, I'm going to be on my own. And let's say you live alone in your apartment. I bet you still have house rules. If you're by yourself in your apartment, you have house rules of your own that you've made up. And it's strange, even you may not obey your own house rules. Have you ever done that? It's like, you know what? I'm going to make this rule to myself. I'm going to have a clean room. Or I'm never going to go to bed and have dirty dishes left in the sink. You know, you say these things to yourself, and maybe you even break your own house rules. All right? And so we all have them. Now here's a list of some house rules that maybe a house may have. And I think these are pretty good. If you open it, close it. That may be talking about your mouth as well. I don't know. If you turn it on, turn it off. If you break it, fix it. If you can't fix it, report it. If you borrow it, return it. If you make a mess, clean it. If you move it, put it back. If you don't know, ask. If it doesn't concern you, don't mess with it. I can print those off for you if you want them. But, you know, they're good, right? This is just an example. And you can make them as specific as you want. Don't touch Dad's, you know, vinyl records, you know, whatever it may be. You can make them as good as you want, but these are basic and they're simple, right? That's why they're so good. Those are very simple things. And I can imagine if most homes followed these rules, they would make lives better, right? How many times have you been looking for something because someone else used it? Or how many times have you wondered, who broke that? And it's just interesting. So they may not be spoken, but they are all understood, okay? Now, growing up in our house, Dad and Mom never sat down with us and said, these are the house rules. But we found out what the house rules, and I was the youngest of four. So the way I learned what the house rules were, I found out what my older brother got spanked for. I realized, I'm not going to do that. Now, and he was a good one for me to watch because he got spanked a lot for those things. Now, I got spanked for some, but I was sometimes a quicker learner than he was on those things. But you learn sometimes by punishment, don't you? You learn by punishment. Sometimes you learn just for common sense. That doesn't work well. And Dad would say, didn't you know better? And I'll say, no, I didn't know better. And so these house rules are for our protection. You know, when Dad says, you know, don't mess with my tools, it's not just because he doesn't want them broken, but when I was younger, I didn't know how to use them in a safe way. And then later, he would teach me. I said, oh, this is cool. He was teaching me the tools, how to use tools, but then I had to use them. And with that came responsibility and things like that. So the previous rules, you know, you leave those, but you know what? They're still there. So going back to the 25-year-old kid that's adopted, or young man or young woman that's adopted, you learn the new house rules, and you left the old ones, but you know what? You still kind of have them inside somewhere. And this is interesting because we all went through this process when we became a Christian. Because God has house rules. If you're going to live under my house, my spiritual house, there are some rules you need to live by. And when we become Christian, we're leaving our old house rules, the way that we used to live by, but you know what? They're still inside of us some. And so that can cause some difficulty. So I'm used to staying up as long as I want, or eating whatever I want, or saying whatever I want, doing whatever I want, and that may change. Well, absolutely it changes, right? It definitely changes. And we can see this happening a lot with Israel, with the Israelites. And we see it with new Christians in the New Testament. And honestly, we can see it in our own lives. And so I want us to think about this, that we needed to be rescued. So most of us were not adopted children, but we have been adopted. If you became a Christian, we have been adopted by God. Because we choose our father, we choose our parent who's going to create the house rules for us, all right? Look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. Giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Okay? He qualified us through Jesus. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Okay? So we were in a house of darkness, We were slaves to sin. The devil was our father, okay? He was. And then God has given us wonderful opportunity to become members of his house. It says, transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. Transferred us, okay? We didn't do the transferring. What we do is when we become Christians, we say we want to be transferred. And he transfers us by the blood of Jesus, okay? Now, it's interesting. How many of you would, if you ask kids that they could pick any home they wanted to live in, which one would they choose? Now, it's interesting, as a 5-year-old, how would that decision be made? They maybe think, which one has the most toys? Which one's going to give me what I want? Which one will feed me anything I want? But if you ask a 25-year-old, which one would you want to be in? And you say, which one's going to teach me the best? If he's mature and a good thinker and wise, which one will help me and give me the best future? Now, you may think that's silly, but everybody does this still today. Everybody does this, and usually what do they choose? If you have to choose between the one that just gives you everything you want in the moment or one that's going to give you the best future, most people choose the one that gives them whatever they want in the moment. By the high majority. Even Christians, when they choose churches, they choose the first. Give them what they want, give them what's pleasing to them, instead of what would give them the best future. And so he saved us from a house of deception to a house of redemption. And I think that is just a good way of looking at it, because people who do not have Jesus as their Lord, who do not have God as their Father, they're deceived. They think that their way of life is going to give them fulfillment, that's going to fulfill them who they are. Now, of course, we know that only God can fulfill us. Only God gives us all that we need. And so isn't it a blessing to have left that house of deception? Now, unfortunately, some people go back to that. Now, the reason why I wanted to focus on this year, and these are very basic rules, like the examples I gave before. Aren't these 10 Commandments very basic? And you think, surely everybody lives by them. But we've learned that a lot of people do not live by these rules. And these basic 10 rules have been something that they've become deep in our society nowadays to talk about these. Even let's say one, do not steal. Oh, that's an important conversation to have. You know, it depends. When is it okay to steal? Because some situations it's okay to steal. So I want us to go through each one of these, not only to hopefully deepen our understanding of them, but also for us to learn how to communicate these with other people. Because that's one of our tasks, isn't it? To be able to learn how to communicate these with other people, with non-believers, so they can see the wisdom of God's guidance. Because sadly, a lot of people don't agree with this. Well, they may say to stay true to stealing. Of course it's wrong to steal, but in their mind they steal a lot of times, whether it be what they do in their taxes, what they take home from work, and things like that. Maybe you've seen that. People have these situational ethics. So Dylan's class right now coincides with this some. People, okay, I agree with the 10 Commandments, but of course, there's a lot of gray area there. And so I want us to think about that and look about that. So John chapter 1 verse 12 says, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." And so God, who does he call to be his children? All of us. God has called all of us to be his children. Unfortunately, most people do not take up that call. They do not want to be his children. So we choose whose house we live in. Now, when you became a Christian and you started learning the house rules of what it is to be a Christian, how'd that make you think? What did you think about that? How did that make you feel? And it's interesting, some people, they learn these and it turns them off for some reason. To me, it's a blessing because as we learn about these house rules, they're not do's and don'ts. They're guidance for a good life. And I think that's the best way for us to introduce them to non-Christians is that this way of life is not a do and don't, but a way to have a successful life in this world. And so looking at our scripture reading here in 1 Samuel 12, 19 through 21, says, Then all the people said to Samuel, Pray to the Lord your God for your servants, so that we do not die. For we have added to our sins this evil by asking for ourselves a king. Samuel said to the people, Do not fear, you have committed all this evil, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Indeed, you must not turn aside, for then you would go after useless things which cannot benefit or save, because they are useless, futile. Okay? So the people knew that they did wrong. And we still kind of make the decision today. We mess up. Even us Christians, sometimes we can find ourselves making something else king of our life. Even maybe like a president, or maybe a career, or even family. You know, we can go into that and look at that soon as we go through these 10 commandments. And so Samuel warned them, don't turn away from the Lord. Yes, you messed up. And yes, he was disappointed and angry with you. But that doesn't mean you have to stay on this wrong path. Right the ship and start again to do what's right. It's kind of like these New Year's resolutions a lot of people make. They think once they get off of them, then they're broken. I can never go back. No, you know, those New Year's resolutions that you maybe have given yourself, you can keep going back to them. And hopefully throughout the year, you're getting better. And it's not just a time period, but it's a new lifestyle. And that's how I see this Christian life. When you become a Christian, there is a time that you are adjusting, but it's not for a short time. It's a new lifestyle that we have. And so continuing on, starting verse 22, For the Lord will not abandon his people on account of his great name, because the Lord has been pleased to make you a people for himself. Furthermore, as for me, far be it from me that I would sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do evil, both you and your king will be swept away. All right, and so it's interesting. So he says, fear and serve with all your being. Another way to say fear is to respect. Respect and serve God with all of your being, with all that you are. You need to respect and serve God. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people think that you do that because you agree with God. You agree with the 10 Commandments, but we need to do that when it's not convenient as well. And I love how he ends this passage here. He says, if you do evil. Now, did you ever have this conversation with your parents? Where they may not say if you do evil, it's like, as long as you live here, you're going to do this or that. If you don't do this or that, you're not going to live here anymore. Now, it might not have been that straightforward, but was that understood in some way? Or if you don't do what's right, then you won't have the keys to the car anymore. Or if you don't do what's right, you're going to lose some privileges of living here. Okay? And that is a threat. And that wasn't just mean mom and dad, they have to have their way. That's mom and dad using that tool that they had in order to try to get you on a good, right path. Now, in the moment, it seems like mom and dad are being pretty mean. They're keeping things from me. Or they're just kind of vindictive. Now, sadly, some people see God that way. Well, look at God. If I don't do everything his way, he's going to leave me? That's not nice. Well, it's really a great blessing. He's doing everything he can to try to keep us on the right path. He's even willing to discipline us. All right? And so nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in the way God has done things. And he says, if you continue to go down this path of evil, I will leave you and your king. All right? Would God do that today? Absolutely. Well, really what he's doing is, I allow you to leave me. It's not that I throw you from me. I let you leave my house because I'm going to do what's right. My house is going to be where things are done right and correct and obey my rules. And so this wonderful guidance is a wonderful blessing to us. So we are not left to guess what God expects of us. Thankfully, he did write his house rules. He wrote them in stone. Now it's interesting. He wrote them one time, and then Moses dropped them, and then Moses wrote them down himself the second time. I think it'd be really cool to see what God's handwriting looked like. But unfortunately, only Moses got to see that. And so it was destroyed. And there's a lot to be talked about, the Ten Commandments and God writing those there, and maybe we'll get into that while we talk about this. But what a blessing to know clearly what God expects of us. Now, you may think, Ten Commandments, that's Old Testament stuff. We don't have to live by the Ten Commandments anymore. Well, look at these guys. Look at these 10 commandments. Which one do you not agree with? Some have said number 4. Don't keep the Sabbath, right? But I'll talk about that as well. I believe all of these we need to live by. All of them. And I'll go so far to say that these were written before they were put on stone. I believe they were written on our souls. God has made us in their image. And I believe all people pretty much live by these they know that these are true just by the way he made us. Because as it talks about in Romans 1 and 2, a lot of people do these, even without knowing the law, they do these. So it's interesting, little kids, they know most of these and live by these, even though they weren't taught Hebrew or taught the Ten Commandments or not brought in a Christian home. They live by these. On the playground, they do this. Where does that come from? It comes from the nature that God has made us. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people outgrow these, meaning sin has calloused over their connection to their God-given guidance. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. So David says here, teach me your ways, O Lord, that I may live according to your truth. Grant me purity of heart, that I may honor you. Is that our desire? Do we say, God, help me to live according to you so I can have a pure heart? So I can honor you? Or do we think, God, help me to do good enough so I can get into heaven? If that's our mindset, then will we truly know God? We need to love truth. We need to love God's law to the point that we want it to consume us so we can always be on the right side. And I tell you what, the world needs this. The world needs these basic truths. They've become complex to the world. As sad as it is, these basic, straightforward house rules are confusing to the world. And they think, okay, who's this for? Okay, maybe for the kids, but not for us adults, because, we know better. No, this is for everybody. And hopefully for us Christians, we're being good examples of them. If you're Christian and you're not living by these, or they're situational for you, then you're not being a good example. Because God's guidance isn't to restrain us, but to free us from sin, free us from the house of deception, so we can live a house of spiritual freedom. Yes, there are some do's and don'ts, but it's for our own good. And this psalm, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path, is to help us to have a good life. And so one of the things that we have to think about is, at what point do we instruct others or correct others? That becomes difficult, doesn't it? especially when we know that they don't want to hear from us. So the 10 Commandments are still a guide and blessing to us. And I think probably one of the problems is they're not talked about enough. I don't know, maybe when some of you were in public school, they discussed the 10 Commandments. Did any of you discuss 10 Commandments while you were in school? Some of you say yes. They didn't when I was in school. That was already done away with. And it's interesting to hear people say, what's gone on with the culture today? Why is society so much immoral now? Well, probably because we're leaving the basic foundation of our teaching. I think most great civilizations were created on these basic 10 Commandments. And as we leave this, yes, God may very well discipline us, but it is us leaving God as opposed to God leaving us. So as we look about this here, see these house rules being explained in this way, we need to understand these. Understand them and take them to heart and have a passion for them to the point that we want everybody that we love and care for to follow them as well. And see that this is a blessing to them. So hopefully you enjoy this as we get into it and we'll look at some situations where it can be difficult to follow these. But we need to have a passion to please God and always do what's right. I want to give an invitation because part of the house rules as a Christian is that we have to come to God through Jesus. And that's always true. We can't say to ourselves that there's other ways to God, but it's only through Jesus. If you don't know Jesus, please come forward as we sing this song.